Winter's bite was nothing compared to the searing agony that erupted on her skin. One tiny, freezing hand reached from the blood-stained snow gripping her wrist. As the infant cried out, an ancient royal crest burned into her flesh, binding an outcast Omega to the most feared Alpha alive. Bitter winds howled through the dense, unforgiving pines of the Caledonian forest, carrying with them the scent of approaching death. It was the heart of December in the year 1243, a time when the northern territories were swallowed by an endless, brutal winter. Rowena Fairchild trudged through the knee-deep drifts, her thin, tattered woolen cloak offering little protection against the biting cold. As an Omega of the Silverpine Pack, she was entirely accustomed to the harsh realities of survival. While the Alphas and Betas feasted in the warmth of the Great Hall in Oak Haven, Rowena and the other low-ranking wolves were left to scavenge for damp firewood, just to keep their drafty hovels from becoming icy tombs. The frost clung to her dark eyelashes, and her fingers were numb and bruised from breaking dead branches off the frozen oaks. Her pack, led by the merciless Alpha Bram, viewed Omegas as little more than indentured servants. Rowena had learned long ago to keep her head down, to mask her scent with ash and pine needles, and to remain entirely invisible. But the forest held secrets on this treacherous evening, secrets that would forever shatter her quiet life of servitude. A sharp, piercing sound cut through the howling gale. Rowena froze her boots, sinking deeper into the powder. She strained her ears, wondering if it was the shriek of a dying rabbit or the trickery of a winter spirit. Then it came again, a high-pitched, desperate wail that undeniably belonged to a human child, or more accurately, a werewolf pup. Tossing her gathered wood aside, Rowena scrambled over a snowbank, her instincts overriding her fear of the encroaching darkness. She followed the fading cries toward a ravine near the frozen banks of the River Trent. What she found there made her blood run colder than the surrounding ice. A carriage, its polished black wood, splintered and shattered, lay overturned at the bottom of the rocky slope. The unmistakable scent of iron and copper hung heavy in the air. Bodies were scattered across the crimson-stained snow, heavily armored guards, wearing the silver direwolf crest of the House of Lancaster. They had been slaughtered, their throats torn out by massive rogue wolves. Near the wreckage, leaning against the roots of an ancient elm, was a woman dressed in rich velvet finery. Her lifeless eyes stared blankly into the canopy, but her stiff arms were wrapped tightly around a bundle of royal blue silk. The wailing was emanating from that very bundle. Rowena fell to her knees beside the dead woman, her breath hitching in her throat. She gently pried the heavy silk away, revealing a red-faced, shivering infant. The baby boy could not have been more than a few months old, but his pale blue eyes were bright with a fierce, innate power. He was freezing, his lips tinged with a dangerous shade of blue. "Hush, little one," Rowena whispered, her voice trembling as she reached out to lift him from the dead woman's frozen embrace. "I have you. I have you." The moment her bare fingers brushed against the infant's skin, something unnatural occurred. The baby stopped crying instantly. He blinked up at her, and with a sudden, impossible strength for a newborn, his tiny hand shot out and clamped firmly around her left wrist. A jolt of raw electric power shot up Rowena's arm. She gasped, trying to pull away, but the infant's grip was locked like iron. Then came the fire. An excruciating, blinding pain erupted on the inside of her wrist, so intense that she let out a strangled scream. It felt as though someone had taken a blacksmith's white-hot branding iron and pressed it directly against her flesh. Rowena collapsed into the snow, gritting her teeth as the smell of burning skin filled her nose. The surrounding snow hissed and melted beneath her arm as an ancient, powerful magic took hold of her very soul. When the agonizing heat finally subsided, she pulled her arm back, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. She stared down at her wrist in absolute horror. There, permanently etched into her pale skin in stark, pitch-black ink, was a mark. It was not just any mark. It was the crest of a snarling direwolf, intertwined with a crown of thorns. Rowena felt the world spin. Every wolf in the Northern Territories knew that symbol. It was the royal seal of King Alistair Lancaster, the supreme alpha of the Obsidian Crown. But this was no ordinary tattoo. It was a soul bond mark. According to ancient werewolf lore, such a mark only appeared when the moon goddess recognized a profound, undeniable link between a monarch and his fated mate. But why had it appeared now? Why, through the touch of this orphaned child, panic set in? If Alpha Bram discovered an Omega bearing the king's royal mark, he would undoubtedly flay her alive, believing it to be a treasonous forgery. Worse, if the king's enemies who had slaughtered this caravan returned, they would kill her and the child without hesitation. Rowena acted on pure, desperate instinct. She stripped the dead woman of her heavy fur cloak, wrapping the infant tightly within it to conceal the royal blue silk. She then tore a strip of fabric from her own petticoat and bound her burning wrist, hiding the royal crest from view. Cradling the warm bundle against her chest, Rowena abandoned her firewood and fled back toward the village of Oakhaven, the heavy snowfall already moving to erase her tracks and bury the grim scene in white. 3 agonizing days passed in the miserable, drafty confines of Rowena's stone cottage. She had named the baby Callum, whispering the moniker in the dark as she fed him warm goat's milk, soaked into scraps of linen. The child was extraordinarily resilient, his icy pallor fading into a healthy, rosy glow almost immediately. But the tranquility of their hiding spot was nothing more than an illusion. Word had spread like wildfire through the taverns and markets of Oakhaven. The kingdom was in a state of absolute, terrifying uproar. Traitors from the Southern Territories, allegedly funded by the treacherous Duchess Camilla, had ambushed the royal procession. King Alistair's carriage had been decoyed, and his infant son, the sole heir to the Obsidian Crown, had been stolen in the chaos. The king, a notoriously ruthless and hardened warrior who had already lost his queen to a fever the year prior, was tearing the Northern Territories apart in his grief and rage. Rowena knew she harbored the most sought-after child in the realm. Every time she looked at Callum, her bound wrist throbbed with a rhythmic pulse, a constant reminder of the magical, dangerous tether that now bound her to a monarch she had never met. She wanted to return the boy to march up to the guards and hand him over, but she knew the reality of her world. An Omega turning up with the royal heir would not be hailed as a savior. She would be accused of the kidnapping, tortured for information, and executed. Her fears materialized on the morning of the 4th day. A deafening blast from a bronze war horn shook the snow from the thatched roofs of Oakhaven. Rowena bolted upright from her cot, clutching Callum tightly. The heavy, rhythmic thundering of armored war horses echoed through the cobblestone streets. The scent that washed over the village was suffocating, a suffocating aura of pure, unadulterated alpha dominance, laced with the sharp metallic tang of blood and ozone. It forced every wolf in the village to their knees. King Alistair had arrived. Out every man, woman, and pup into the square, bellowed the booming voice of Alpha Bram, eager to grovel before his sovereign. Do not keep the king waiting. Rowena's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. She looked down at Callum, who was blessedly asleep. She wrapped him in a bundle of coarse brown wool, making him look like a sack of root vegetables, and slung him onto her back. She checked the dirty bandages around her wrist, ensuring the intricate black crest was completely concealed, and stepped out into the freezing morning air. The village square was a sea of terrified faces. Hundreds of wolves from the Silverpine pack stood shivering in the snow, their heads bowed in submission. At the center of the square sat King Alistair, atop a massive coal-black destrier. He was a terrifying sight, broad-shouldered and imposing, wrapped in dark furs and silver armor. His face was a mask of cold fury, his jaw set, and his striking amber eyes sweeping over the crowd like a hawk searching for prey. Beside him stood his royal guards, their swords already drawn. Alpha Bram was bowing so deeply, his nose nearly touched the frost. "My king." Bram stammered, his usual arrogance entirely evaporated. "We are honored. We have searched our lands, but there is no sign of the traitors or the royal heir." "You have searched nothing, Bram." King Alistair's voice was like grinding stone, resonating deep within the chests of everyone present. "My trackers traced the scent of the ambush to the edge of the Caledonian woods. My son was brought near this very village." Rowena shrank toward the back of the crowd, trying to hide behind the broad shoulders of a blacksmith named Garrett. Her wrist began to burn with an intensity she hadn't felt since the forest. The mark was reacting to the king's proximity. It was a searing, localized heat that made her grit her teeth to suppress a whimper. King Alistair dismounted his heavy boots, crunching against the ice. He began to walk slowly through the rows of kneeling villagers, inhaling deeply. He was searching for the scent of his bloodline. As the king drew closer to the rear of the crowd, Callum suddenly stirred. Whether it was the cold, the oppressive alpha aura, or a blood connection to the man approaching the infant, let out a soft, restless whimper. Rowena bounced the bundle gently, praying to the goddess for silence, but the sound had already carried. King Alistair stopped dead in his tracks. His amber eyes snapped directly to where Rowena was cowering. The crowd parted instantly, violently desperate to clear a path for the monarch and avoid his wrath. Suddenly, Rowena was left standing entirely exposed, the disguised bundle strapped to her back and her left arm clutching her chest. "You," the king commanded, his gaze piercing through her meager defenses. "Step forward, Omega." Alpha Bram rushed forward, sneering at Rowena. "Forgive her, my king. She is a worthless scavenger, an Omega of no consequence. She likely stole food from your guards." "Silence!" Alistair roared, the sheer force of his voice sending Bram tumbling backward into the snow. The king stepped right into Rowena's personal space. Up close, he was overwhelming. The smell of cedar winter storms and raw power enveloped her. He didn't reach for the bundle on her back. Instead, his eyes dropped to her left arm, where the dirty linen bandages were suddenly glowing with a faint golden light from beneath the fabric. The magic of the royal seal was responding to its master. Without a word, King Alistair reached out and gripped her wrist. His touch was not cruel, but it possessed an unyielding firmness. With a swift pull, he tore the filthy rags away. The crowd erupted in collective gasps of shock. There, glowing faintly against her pale skin, was the pristine, undeniable mark of the obsidian crown. Alpha Bram turned ashen, his jaw dropping in horror as he realized he had been treating the king's fated mate like common filth. King Alistair's furious expression shattered, replaced by absolute stunned disbelief. He looked from the glowing royal mark to Rowena's terrified eyes, and then slowly he reached out and peeled back the brown wool on her back, revealing the wide blue eyes of his lost son. Silence fell over the village of Oakhaven, a suffocating quiet so profound that the only sound was the howling winter wind tearing through the pine canopy. Hundreds of wolves held their breath, their eyes darting between the glowing royal crest on Rowena's wrist and the living, breathing air to the obsidian crown swaddled against her back. Alistair Lancaster stood paralyzed for a fraction of a second, his amber eyes wide, with a vulnerability that few in the realm had ever witnessed. Slowly his large, gauntlet-clad hands reached out. Rowena trembled instinctively, shrinking back, expecting a blow. Omegas were taught that the touch of an alpha brought nothing but pain. But the king did not strike her. Instead, he gently lifted the rough woolen bundle from her shoulders. As he pulled the fabric back to reveal his son's face, a heavy, shuddering breath escaped the monarch's chest. "Callum," Alistair murmured, his deep voice cracking under the weight of immense relief. He pressed his forehead against the infant's soft cheek. The child babbled happily, entirely unbothered by the cold or the terrifying aura of his father. Alpha Bram, realizing the catastrophic magnitude of his error, fell to his knees and scrambled forward in the snow. "My king, praise the moon goddess. The pup is alive. This Omega must have stolen him from the wreckage. She is a thief, a parasite. Hand her over to me, and I shall have her executed for harboring the royal heir, without immediately reporting it to the crown." Alistair's head snapped up. The tender relief in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a murderous, suffocating rage. The alpha aura that exploded from him was so violently oppressive that several villagers cried out, pressing their faces into the frozen mud. Rowena gasped, her knees buckling, but an invisible force, the sudden undeniable hum of the mate bond, kept her upright. "You dare!" Alistair growled his voice, a low, lethal rumble that vibrated through the cobblestones. He handed the infant to his captain of the guard, a towering warrior named Caelan, before stepping toward Bram. "You dare speak of execution for the woman who bears the mark of the obsidian crown. You dare call my fated queen a parasite." "Q Queen," Bram stuttered, his face draining of all color. "My king, surely it is a trick of dark magic. She is an Omega, a lowly scavenger. The goddess would never pair the supreme alpha with a creature of such pathetic standing." Before the final word could fully leave Bram's lips, Alistair moved with blinding speed. He seized the treacherous alpha by the throat, lifting him entirely off the ground. Bram's legs kicked wildly in the air as he choked, clawing at the king's iron grip. "The moon goddess makes no mistakes," Alistair roared, his amber eyes flashing with golden fire. "This woman kept my son alive when my own royal guard fell. She sheltered him, fed him, and protected him, while you sat in your warm hall, ignorant of the blood spilled on your borders. You are stripped of your title, Bram. You are no longer Alpha of the Silverpine Pack. If I ever see your face within my lands again, I will tear your throat out myself." With a flick of his wrist, the king threw the disgraced former Alpha into a snowbank. Bram scrambled away like a beaten cur, vanishing into the tree line without looking back. Alistair turned his attention back to Rowena. She stood trembling in her threadbare cloak, her dark hair tangled and her pale face streaked with dirt and soot. She was terrified. The mark on her wrist pulsed with a warm, steady rhythm, anchoring her to the towering man before her. "What is your name?" the king asked, his tone softening significantly, though his commanding presence remained. "Rowena, your grace," she whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the snow. Alistair stepped into her personal space, reaching out to gently lift her chin with 2 fingers. A jolt of electricity sparked where his skin met hers, sending a rush of warmth through her freezing body. "Look at me, Rowena." Reluctantly, she met his gaze. "You saved my bloodline," he stated firmly, his thumb brushing a smudge of ash from her cheek. "When my son grabbed you, the ancient magic of our ancestors recognized your pure heart and fierce spirit. It bound us together. You are no longer an Omega of Silverpine. You are the queen of the Northern Territories, and you will ride with me to Castle Valerius." Panic flared in her chest. "My king, I am nothing but a servant. I do not know how to be a queen. The court will tear me apart." "Let them try," Alistair said, a dangerous smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "They will quickly learn that anyone who disrespects my mate will share Bram's fate. We leave immediately." The journey to the capital was a blur of opulent carriages and heated furs. Rowena found herself swathed in rich velvets, sitting across from the most powerful man in the world. Callum rested peacefully in her arms, refusing to settle for anyone else, even the king. Alistair watched them, with an intense, calculating gaze, slowly explaining the treacherous political landscape she was about to enter. "Duchess Camilla of the Southern Territories has been pushing for me to take her daughter as my new bride." Alistair explained, pouring 2 silver goblets of spiced wine. "She is ruthless wealthy and commands a massive army. I have no doubt she orchestrated the ambush on my carriage. Bringing an Omega back as my fated mate will infuriate her. The capital is a den of vipers, Rowena. You must stay close to me." Rowena tightened her grip on the sleeping baby. The fear of her old life was fading, replaced by a fierce maternal instinct to protect the child in her arms. "I survived the freezing woods and the cruelty of Oakhaven, my king. I can survive your court." Alistair's eyes darkened with undeniable approval and rising affection. "I believe you can, my queen." Castle Valerius was a towering fortress of black stone and stained glass perched precariously on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking the churning sea. The moment Rowena stepped into the grand hall, she felt the weight of 1,000 hostile stares. The courtiers, dressed in shimmering silks and heavy jewels, parted like the Red Sea, their faces painted with thinly veiled disgust and shock. Word had outpaced their royal procession. Everyone knew the king had returned with his heir, and an Omega claiming to be his fated mate. Standing at the base of the obsidian throne was Duchess Camilla. She was a striking, severe woman, with silver hair piled high upon her head and eyes as cold as a serpent's. She wore a gown of deep emerald, and her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Grace," Camilla purred, dropping into a deep, mocking curtsy. "Praise the heavens the young prince is safe. We feared the worst when the rogue wolves attacked." Her gaze shifted to Rowena, dragging up and down the former Omega's frame with blatant disdain. "And you have brought a nursemaid. How practical." "She is no nursemaid, Camilla," Alistair announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the cavernous hall. He took Rowena's hand, raising it high so the entire court could see the stark black direwolf crest burned into her pale skin. "She is Rowena Lancaster. She bears the mark of the obsidian crown. She is my fated mate and your new queen. Anyone who forgets this will answer to my blade." A collective gasp echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Camilla's smile faltered, her jaw clenching so tightly that the muscles fluttered beneath her powdered skin. "Fated mate," she repeated softly, the words dripping with poison. "How miraculous. A true fairy tale." Rowena felt the malice radiating from the Duchess. The Omega instincts that had kept her alive in the harsh wilderness screamed a clear warning. This woman was a predator, and she was preparing to strike. For the next 2 weeks, Rowena's life transformed into a grueling test of endurance. While Alistair was occupied interrogating prisoners from the ambush, trying to find concrete proof of Camilla's treason, Rowena was left to navigate the treacherous waters of the royal court. Courtiers whispered behind ornate fans, servants deliberately ignored her requests, and accidents began to happen. A poisoned goblet of wine was intercepted by her heightened sense of smell. A loosened saddle girth nearly threw her from a horse. The climax of Camilla's desperate plotting occurred on the night of the winter solstice. Alistair was hosting a mandatory war council in the lower depths of the fortress. Rowena was alone in the royal nursery, gently rocking Callum to sleep beside a roaring hearth. Outside, a violent blizzard battered the stained glass windows, masking the sounds of the castle. Without warning, the heavy oak doors of the nursery clicked shut, the iron lock sliding into place with a sickening thud. The temperature in the room plummeted as the hearth fire was abruptly extinguished by a localized gust of dark magic. From the shadows stepped 3 men dressed in midnight black leather, their faces concealed by masks. They held serrated daggers coated in an oily green venom. Behind them, stepping gracefully into the moonlight, filtering through the frost-covered glass, was Duchess Camilla. "It is a pity," Camilla whispered, her eyes locked on the baby in Rowena's arms. "I would have preferred to just kill you, little Omega. But the boy must die too, so my bloodline can inherit the throne." Rowena didn't scream. The terrified, submissive Omega she had once been was dead, left behind in the snows of Oakhaven. In her place stood a fiercely protective mother, fueled by the ancient magic of the royal mate bond. "If you take one more step, Duchess," Rowena growled, her eyes flashing with an unnatural golden light that mirrored the king's, "I will rip you apart." Camilla laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Kill them!" The assassins lunged. Driven by pure instinct, Rowena spun, placing Callum safely into his reinforced iron crib. As the first assassin slashed at her throat, she ducked beneath the blade. The royal mark on her wrist flared with blinding, searing heat. A surge of immense alpha-level strength flooded her veins. She drove her palm upward, striking the assassin under his chin with a sickening crunch. He collapsed instantly. The second attacker hesitated, giving Rowena the opening she needed. She grabbed a heavy brass candelabra from the mantel and swung it like a warhammer, breaking the man's arm and sending his poisoned dagger clattering across the stone floor. Camilla's arrogant smirk vanished. "Useless fools!" she shrieked, drawing a hidden stiletto from her sleeve and charging toward the crib. "No!" Rowena roared. She threw herself between the Duchess and the child, taking the sharp bite of the stiletto deep into her left shoulder. Pain exploded through her body, but she did not fall. She reached out, gripping Camilla's throat with her uninjured arm, her nails elongating into deadly sharp claws. Before Rowena could deliver the final blow, the heavy oak doors were blown off their iron hinges, splintering into 1,000 pieces. King Alistair stood in the threshold, a terrifying vision of absolute wrath. His armor was discarded, his chest heaving, and his eyes completely black with his wolf surging to the surface. Captain Kalen and a dozen royal guards swarmed into the room, instantly subduing the remaining assassin. Alistair crossed the room in a blur. He did not look at Camilla. He only had eyes for Rowena, who was bleeding heavily onto the fine rugs. "Take the Duchess to the dungeons," Alistair commanded, his voice devoid of all mercy. "Her execution will be at dawn. Burn her lands and scatter her family." The guards dragged the screaming, cursing Duchess from the room. Alistair fell to his knees beside Rowena, pulling her gently into his arms. The wound in her shoulder was deep, but the venom had not reached her heart. "You are safe," he whispered fiercely, pressing his lips to her forehead. "I have you." Rowena looked past him to the crib where little Callum was wide awake, watching them with his bright blue eyes. She smiled, resting her head against her king's broad chest. She had been cast out, frozen and hunted, but the Omega had found her home. She was a survivor, a mother, and undeniably the true queen of the Obsidian Crown. Love-thrilling werewolf romances, full of twists, royalty, and fierce revenge. Hit the like button if Rowena's epic transformation from a bullied Omega to a badass queen gave you chills. Don't forget to share this story with your pack and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking dramatic tales of fated mates and alpha kings. Drop a comment below. Would you have saved the baby in the snow?